Hello and welcome to this week's Preps Preview alongside Justin Kahn. I'm Aaron Dow. A lot of basketball going on, and we're kind of in the middle of the Macon County tournament right now. But now we're kind of past the Thanksgiving tournaments. We've had a couple of games to kind of see, which players and which teams have kind of broken out a little bit. Who stood out to you, Justin? I mean, which players kind of caught your eye so far?
Early in the season, I think the guys that we thought would be good have looked pretty good. With Christian Williams and Marcus Bartley both having a kind of crazy nights on Friday where they hit game-winning shots after not maybe playing their best games. But both those guys have shown that they're going to have big years. And there's Brock Snarski before he got hurt was playing well, and he'll be back. So the guys I think we thought were going to be good were good. For me, there have been a couple of guys. One guy for LSA who's kind of surprised me has been Bryce Ellis. I thought he would have a good year. I thought he might be, he and Hunter York would probably be their sort of go-to guys. But he's had some games where he's had 28, some really huge scoring nights. So I think he's maybe exceeded my expectations a little bit here early. And another guy, and hasn't been consistent necessarily yet, but D. Woods of Deland Weldon, who we know obviously way better as the running back for and defensive lineman for Cerro Gordo, but he had a game where he had 41 and 17. I don't know how consistently he's going to do that, but if he can even do half of that's a big year. And Deland Weldon is going to have a tough time competing with the more known quantities in 1A, but I don't know that I want to be matched up against D Woods. Right. So those are a couple of guys for me that have kind of opened my eyes a little bit that maybe I didn't expect coming in.
Yeah, I think Marcus Bartley and Christian Williams. I think Nick Stokowski from Monticello was someone who kind of thought would come in after a lot of those seniors left, and he had a 52-point weekend, including a 34-point game. Monticello is still kind of struggling as a team, but really as an individual, Nick Stokowski has really taken over some of these games. But Garrett Shea is kind of the guy that I've thought is really stood out. You kind of have that whole group, and I think a lot of people thought Shea would be one of the guys that would be a more player in that offense. But he averaged 12 points last year, and then in the first game of that county tournament, he scored 12, and everybody kind of thought it was a down game. He really wasn't shooting very well, but he still came in at the end. I mean, he hit the free throws late, was able to steal the game. And then just a couple days earlier, he had a 32-point game. So I mean, he's shown he can score. And the game against Cerro Gordo, he was the guy that they kind of counted on, or he was the guy that kind of closed the deal with those free throws. So he's really impressed me so far this early part of the season.
Team-wise, for me, a team that's maybe surprised me a little bit is Mount Zion. I wasn't sure what to expect out of them, honestly, after last year. They lost so much senior-wise, and I think that I just didn't know what they were going to be. When they hang 100 points on Pena, though, that opened my eyes. I think they had the 2 losses to Mattoon, and one thing that's interesting, we don't really know where these teams fit right now as far as the hierarchy of the area. I would really love to see both of those teams play Taylorville, and to kind of get a little more of a cross, of where those teams are at. But I'm going to tell you, if you put 100 points on anybody, especially a competitive program like Pena, you have some talent, you have some skill, and Austin Thacker had a few big early games, but really recently it's been really a balanced effort. There's been, Peyton Grindstaff has played well, Jordan Horath, and Mason Bruce. I mean, they have a good mix of guys that I don't know that we knew. I mean, Thacker, we knew that he was going to be pretty decent, but this has been a group that, is kind of, as a team, has really stepped up and done some things. We'll see how good they are going forward, but I've been a little surprised by them.
Yeah, especially in the early season. I kind of thought maybe they would start out a little slower, and kind of once they got those pieces together, they would move forward and be all right. But yeah, I mean, if you hang 100 points on someone, you're obviously doing something well. I talked to Ryan Brown before the season. He was like, well, I kind of have like a starting 6. I didn't really know. And sometimes when coaches say that, you think, okay, maybe, they just want to say starting 5. But really, I mean, they have a good solid 5, and then a couple people deep on the bench where they're able to put people in and not really suffer too much of a downgrade. And I think the 3-point shooting is a huge difference from last year. I mean, last year they were kind of pound it inside and do that. And this year they're and I think Thacker is a big reason for that too, who really didn't shoot a whole lot last year. Now he's kind of leading that charge, a lot of 3-point shooting, and I think they had 7 different players in that Pena game hit 3-pointers. So, I mean, pretty much everybody on the team can hit a 3-pointer. One surprise, I think Cerro Gordo Bemet. I thought they would have a little bit stronger start to the season, but I think for basketball, I think, as far as, getting that co-op together, people saw the success that football had and thought, okay, basketball maybe should be the same. But I think it's a little harder in basketball. Football, you run your routes, and if the play breaks down in 3 seconds or 4 seconds, and then you really got to scramble at the end. But I think basketball, there's a lot more improvising that has to be done. I think it'll just maybe take the time for those plays to develop. And kind of gross is still, he had a 28-point game and led him to a win the other day. But I think, Saragota, it's kind of surprised me a little bit that they didn't get up to maybe a quicker start, but it's still early in the season.
I agree with you that I think in basketball, in football you're out there, you're playing 11 on offense, and sometimes you even have a few more that you're not playing two-way, so you're playing some other guys on defense. In basketball, you have 5 guys that can be on the court at once. They have more than 5 good players, and I think it's taking a while to find the right mixes. And that happens with teams that are deep sometimes. I think those type of teams take a little longer to get going. I think we should also mention, Mattoon is a team that won like 3 games a couple years ago. They beat Taylorville 3 times. Yeah. It's amazing that some of these teams, Mattoon and Taylorville now are 2 of our better Class 3A teams in our area. So that I'd say Mattoon's another team that definitely has jumped out. And then back to the point on Cerro Gordo a little bit with the depth. I think MacArthur is also dealing a little bit with depth. Just trying to. They have so many good players and trying to find the right mix of guys. These are guys who have played together quite a bit, but it's still, early in the season, and kind of trying to find, chemistry with each group that they bring in has been a little bit of an issue. They are 4-2 right now, though, so they're in a much better spot than they were last year. And they've won a couple of games they would have lost last year. I think this weekend was a big weekend for them with the wins against a normal West team that I know they feel like they should have beat much worse, but they still won the game. And then Galesburg on Saturday, that one got a little scary. I think last year there were times early in the season in particular where they folded in games like that. And Bartley has gotten really good at saying, okay, I'm going to win the game. Even if he's not shooting well, he can hit free throws or make plays for his teammates. And I think his leadership has been the difference. Talent-wise, they're really good, and I think once they do, really get it together, they're going to start, beating teams worse. Their size is always going to be a problem. They were bigger than Galesburg, so that helped. But I think there are a lot of nights that's going to be a problem where they're not going to be able to necessarily blow out teams because of that. But they have the talent at guard to really get up and down. And you saw a couple of times against Galesburg where they would create some turnovers, get in the open floor, and they were really exciting when they do that. And I think that going forward, they needed to have more of that. And that starts on the defensive end for them. Yeah,
and getting into the open floor, in the Turkey tournament, I saw it several times. That's where they're really good. And the decision making on Sanchez Space and Jalen or Jaquay Owens, in addition to Marcus Bartley, I feel like if they can get in the open floor, the instincts are so good, and there's so many layups that they were able to get on fast breaks and 2-and-1. It seemed like the layups they're having trouble with is kind of in the set offense and the set half court. When they're that fast break, that's kind of where things are starting to come together. I think also with the depth, and it depends on how this gets called later in the season. But I feel like early in the season, there's a lot of calls going on, and if teams keep racking up fouls the way they have, having that depth is going to be so crucial down the stretch to where you can put guys in who have had that playing time earlier in the season. They know how to play with other players on the floor. So it'll be interesting to see how, as the season goes on, if the referees are calling the same kind of fouls that they're calling earlier in the season, and if they are, having deeper teams like MacArthur has, I think is going to be a real asset down the stretch.
That said, Bartley has to be on the floor. Yeah. Bartley has to stay out of foul trouble and be on the floor. That team is definitely, they lose confidence more than they maybe even should when he's not on the floor. But, and he got into foul trouble against Galesburg, and they were hurting during that time, and when he came back in, everything was fine. So, and I think Kamari Jones is a guy too that really, is so athletic, and I think, we're starting to see signs of him coming around. He can shoot the ball, and in the open court, he's another guy that's just, amazing in the open court. So a lot of fun guys on that team. It's just kind of a case now of just putting it together, and we'll see how that goes as the season. They have a tough stretch coming up here with Champaign Central, Champaign Centennial, and Urbana, not in that order. I know it's those 3 teams. I think Centennial is the first team. But they'll play those 3 teams, and that's a tough, all on the road, that's a tough stretch there. If they can come out of there with 1 or 2 wins, I think you got to be pretty happy.
And Champaign Central and Centennial just had a triple overtime game where those teams are very evenly matched, and both those teams, and I think Urbana too, maybe a little less kind of a caliber team, but definitely Central and Centennial will be a tough team.
Okay, I want to switch gears here a little bit and talk about the girls' teams a little bit. Aaron, what's a girls' team that's kind of stood out to you early in the season?
I think Eisenhower for sure. They're 5-2, which they didn't have 5 wins until much later in the season last year. They're balanced. Well, you have Tiana Cook, who's been putting up crazy numbers. I mean, she had 28 the other day. She's averaging more than 20 points for the season right now. But you also have Brianna Baltimore, you have Devin Thaxton, you have quite a few players who have hit double digits in scoring. They're all kind of playing their role. And when I mean, Sean Flaherty was kind of like, well, hopefully we can just get through this period because they got a couple girls that they're waiting to get back in January, and they thought maybe they're kind of short on the bench a little bit. And but really, I mean, they've gone through this about as best as they could. I think this is as good of a start as they've had in a long time. And at 5-2, they got a legitimate number 1 threat, and they can score at any time. I think Eisenhower is fairly dangerous this year.
Yeah, they're 2-0 in the Big 12, and I don't know when they've been 2-0 in the Big 12. There's going to be some tough times in the Big 12. It's a rough conference, but what really impressed me with Cook was putting up the big numbers, and they were winning behind, with 28 and things by her. Then she has a little injury, kind of doesn't have a great game in their last game. And, the girls you mentioned, Thaxton and Baltimore stepped up, and Cambria Thomas stepped up and all scored in double digits and kind of to help her out, which that is really a good sign for them going forward. For me, Sullivan, who's a team that Aaron is always trying to get me to believe in, and I always seem to be kind of on the fence about them. Then they got hammered in their first game against Two Topless. They got just blown out of that game. What isn't even close? And so then I'm even pushing them even more on my back burner. Now they've won 5 straight since that loss to T-Town. They beat Central A&M, who I think is probably one of the 2 or 3 best teams in our area. And they've done it with some good balance. I mean, Britton Boyer is definitely their go-to player, but they have Maggie Plank, that's done some good scoring, and also Emily Newhauser she's had a couple 20-point games in a row now for them. So, they're definitely a team that's probably, we're talking about surprises. They've probably surprised me as much as any team with their 5-1 start and the win against A&M, and just the really nice balance they've had.
Yeah. So make sure you check out Press Pick'em for basketball now. We're only 1 week in, so if you miss 1 week, you're not too far behind.
Though I did, well, it was perfect the first week, so you got some work to do.
It's a long season, though, so. But make sure you check that out. And then Macon County Tournament's going on all week, so make sure you check out our coverage on that, and we'll see you at the games.